Welcome to the Spring 2024 Henry George Lecture at Tobin College of Business. My name is Alexander Gevorkian. I'm the economics professor at the economics department here, and I will be a host for this afternoon. We have a very special guest today, but before this, the usual introduction on Henry George. Henry George was a statesman, economist, politician, journalist, anything else, a very interesting philosopher back in the late 19th century who made a major effort and major imprint on New York City. Although native of Philadelphia, traveled across the world, he comes to New York City to almost to become the most popular mayor elect, but unfortunately passed away just well. One of the major contributions was a conversation and sort of not a conversation even, but really an introduction of a problem of social inequality. He wrote about how the industrial
Lift the mic up.
He wrote about how the industrial progress was great and impressive in the United States at that time, but how unequal the fruits of that progress were. And he proposed various ideas. One of the most popular ones that many might associate Henry George with would be the land value tax, which is very relevant for New York City these days and comes up in many sort of discussions, debates, and policy proposals and so on. But one of the most important, I think, contributions from him that we connect with was his concern about a balanced and what I guess in today's language we call inclusive growth, something that brings economic vitality and economic sort of sustainability and progress to a community and society. So, and it is in this spirit that we organize these lectures at least once a year, sometimes once a semester, with famous economists, worldly philosophers, policymakers, and today is one of them. But before I introduce our speaker, I would like to pass the microphone to our Dean of Tobin College of Business, Dr. Maciej Nowak.
I asked Dr. Gevorkian to, if I could just say a few words, because I feel a special attachment to our speaker here today. For one, I believe, and Dr. Gevorkian, if you could correct me if I'm wrong, this is our first alum who is Henry George lecturer. Is that correct?
Sorry.
Is this the first alum who is that?
I think so.
Yes. Not only an alum, but I'm a little biased in this, being Polish. That I do feel that Dr. Balcerowicz is our most famous alum in Europe, and definitely in Poland, but likely in Europe. I think knowing the history and having heard so much about what he did in Poland and the impact that he had, it was quite incredible for me when I realized that he is an alum of the school that I was going to get to be the dean of. So I was quite excited to finally able to join us here, and really. As you'll see today, the impact, the incredible growth economically that his plan led to in Poland was quite unprecedented. So, that's just my somewhat biased opinion, but I think you'll see that we have quite an impressive speaker. But I will let Dr. Gevorkian do the introduction. So, thank you.
Thank you. Continue. Before I introduce our guest of honor, the plan is the following. We listen to a lecture, and then we'll have time for questions. As everybody knows, students know, the period ends at 3:15, but we can stay a little bit longer after that. If you do have to go to class, thank you. stay as long as you can, please. So with this, with further delays, Leszek Balcerowicz is a Polish economist, statesman, professor at Warsaw School of Economics. He served as a chairman of the National Bank of Poland, 2001-2007, twice as deputy prime minister of Poland, once, and most importantly, minister of finance in the first independent government of Poland in 1990, 89, 90. And that is, even personally for me, a very important moment because I'm a researcher of Eastern Europe and history. And what we know about Leszek Balcerowicz, those who studied that from the books, was the Balcerowicz plan. It was a set of robust and very targeted reforms that were implemented in Poland for Poland's economic transformation, which would later be tried in other places and worked out differently than what we report today on Poland's progress. I guess it's already been mentioned that you're our most famous alum in policymaking, and please, the floor is yours. Please welcome.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here. The first time was here as a student. This was back in 1972, prehistory, and 1994. Then I returned to my country and made my doctorate. And I taught economics at what was called the Central School of Economics and Statistics. And then it was renamed as the Warsaw School of Economics. Now, I never dreamt that Poland would be completely independent and free during my lifetime. The Soviet Union existed, Soviet Union appeared to be very strong. There were no signs of its quick demise. But still, I believed as a very young man that something can be improved. I did not believe that one can introduce democracy under the Soviet domination or rule of law. But at least I thought that some extent of economic freedom, a necessary condition for economic growth, can be introduced. And unofficially, I created a group of then younger people. This was in 1975, to work on the blueprint for Poland's economic reforms, which would not invite Soviet intervention, because we wanted to be realists. It was very easy to say, because the best system is the market economy based on private ownership, but then we believed, and I think we are right again, that it is infeasible. It's not possible. So we worked, I formed this group, I picked up the young economists, and we worked systematically for years. And in 1990, we had a very important event in Poland. You might have heard about solidarity movement. Erhard was a leader, worker leader. When the solidarity movement appeared, and there was an agreement between them, authorities and leadership of solidarity, there was a great demand for so-called social, meaning not official, blueprint for reforms. And turned out that we had all of them. We were systematically on that, so we appeared, we presented the blueprint, and I heard for the first time that there is a Balcerowicz plan. Because we were before, and there was a holiday of solidarity movement for 881, and there was a great demand for these proposals, and solidarity leadership accepted it, but it ended with the introduction of martial law. Most, I think, because of the Soviet pressure. Introduction, solidarity, trade union, which was much more than trade union. The movement, so the movement was made illegal. I was not arrested, and we continued our work, but we did not see the light in the tunnel. 80s was a very good period. Most side that something may change for the better, but still we continue for fun. As a hobby. And then we did not only concentrate on what we would like to introduce in Poland, because there were no prospects, but on the broader topics, importance of property rights, competition, so classical themes, which are very, very important in practical policies. We continue that, and then also another breakthrough, unexpected one. Namely, the authorities, political authorities in Poland came to the conclusion that they had to make an agreement with the opposition because the economic situation was very, very bad. There was no growth. Inflation in '89 was 500%. And Poland was very heavily in debt vis-a-vis the West. So there was an agreement that there was a new government headed by somebody who did not belong to the Communist Party. His name was Ludwig, and he was forming the government. And he did not have any problem with finding candidates for the Minister of Culture, Foreign Minister, Romania. So there was a shortage of candidates for the Minister of Finance. Given the situation, about my wife was there in the back, they're about to leave for Britain as well on the scholarship. When I got the telephone from close advisor to Tobin that he would like to talk to me. So I accepted. Then we met, and he said he was looking for his Ludwig Erhard. You might remember some of the Ludwig. Erhard was a reformer. He was German, he was credited with creating the data therapy. I knew the Polish situation was not well. The chairman was there. That he asked me to consider or reconsider whether I would take the responsibility for the economic stabilization reforms in Poland as a deputy prime minister of the Minister of Finance. I declined. My wife was very strongly against it. He asked me to reconsider, and I accepted it. So it started. So I am not going to tell you exactly what we did, but situation in Poland, economic situation of '89 was very interesting because it was catastrophic. With all kinds of economic problems you can have, as I mentioned, once again, extremely high inflation, about 2% a year, 2% a month, 3% a month. First, a shortages, because there still were some price controls. Heavy debt vis-a-vis West and declining economy. Okay. So I accepted it, but I accepted it because one of the main reasons was that I have created a team. Without a team, you cannot solve collective problems. And I have chosen members of the team, and I knew that they entered the government with me. And I found out some very good people in the government, in the economic positions. So it started. Now, the breakthrough in economic policies happened at the time of '89 to '99. It's consisted in a very tough stabilization in order to reduce inflation. And as rapid as possible, institutional reform. One of the very important topics in analytical economics are different speeds of different changes. So you can put down high inflation pretty quick in a couple of months. But you cannot privatize during the same time state-dominated economy. Remember, socialism was what? It was state-dominated economy. And this was very bad, both for the economy, but also for the rule of law and democracy. There are extremely important systemic connections that socialist countries, in a sense of state-dominated economies, are not only backward, but also they have to be dictatorial. You can't find any example, you cannot falsify the statement that classically defined socialism is always backward, in always dictatorial. Dictatorial means no limits on political power, no division of power. Usually once either military dictatorship or one party dictatorship. Okay, now I can show you perhaps what has changed in the meantime. Okay. And I would like as much time as possible for your inquisitive, difficult question and pronunciations. So how first? So socialism, in a sense of state-dominated economy, is always there. You cannot falsify that. You can't find any exception. Maduro, Venezuela, Maduro's Venezuela is not a way towards paradise. It's always there. And you said that's very important because you have two countries, North and South Korea, which have the same history, the same culture, but they differ very, very much in the institutional regime, and you see the outcomes of that. So social is always backed by capitalism by definition, an economy dominated by private ownership is very different. And a very important practical analytical question is what distinguishes better from worse capitalism? This is an illustration. You have Ireland. Are there any people of Irish origin here? They should be very happy. Because Ireland was a laggard until the 80s, and then turned out into economic failure. And can you imagine the satisfaction of the Irish people, who are now twice as rich as the British, who were dominating Ireland? So you see this Irish tiger, but compare this with Greece and Italy. In Italy, you have stagnation for almost stagnation for the last 20 years. And Greece is not faring much better. So the really important question, it's very important to have capitalism, not socialism. But then the problem only starts. What capitalism? You want to have so that you can have economic growth, which is extremely important for poor countries, but even for rich ones. Okay. Now, China was very poor, and we made on China for as long as it was socialist or communist, and you might know that China under Mao was a scene of mass murder, hunger. 35 or 50 million people, and then cultural revolution. But then there was a turn in the economic policy and economic system. They let private sector grow. They privatized some state-owned enterprises, and only because of that, China started to grow while remaining today. Without that, China would continue to be very poor. But compare China, made on China with Taiwan. Taiwan has been growing even faster. Because they have an even better engine for growth, which is capitalistic economy. Now, just to show you that from both economic and non-economic point of view, state-dominated economy, in other words, socialists everywhere, has been very bad. This is a comparison of Spain and Poland. We used to be at the same low level of per capita income. But then we started to lag behind Spain. The same goes for the comparison of Chile and Cuba, not to mention South Korea and North Korea. So these are natural experiments of history. Well, this is a comparison of Poland. So as you can see, in 1950, we are equally poor. In 1990, we have less than 50% of Spanish per capita income, the cost of. And remember, because that socialism, meaning non-private ownership, was very popular among some Western people. Marxism is still popular among some people. This is real. Absolutely real. So just to remind you of this catastrophic situation in Poland in 1990, we were stagnating for 20 previous years, but in 1989 it was 1% cumulative growth, almost stagnating. Inflation, as I mentioned. Okay. Now, and we were lagging among these, behind these countries. Nowadays, we have exceeded the per capita income plus. So the capita income is higher now than during this in these countries. In summary, we are not growing as fast as China, but in Europe so far, during the after 89 until 2000, Poland's economic growth has been cumulatively speaking, has been faster than ever. Now let me make a digression. If you look at economic growth in the longer run, you should consider two aspects. The first is amount and magnitude and depth of crisis, because crisis is a negative growth. Then average speed during the period of growth. And there are some countries who will be lagging because of crisis. Argentina is a classical example. So during the last 50, 60 years, we've had some 10 or more crises. And there's a tendency among some economists to blame prices for free markets. Some economists who do not like it. And today in some academia. But if you look empirically at instances of crisis, then you find most, if you dig deeper, wrong state intervention. There should be no surprise that fiscal crises are due to bad policy. Because fiscal is bad public finance, spending, and taxes, and usually it is spending which is the not taxes. Even in the United States. The United States is not more than a market economy. And spending to GDP in the United States, which is responsible for much to GDP growth, is as high as in Poland, and it is higher than in some European countries. For example, Netherlands. Okay, what drives fiscal? What drives spending? And spending is high. It is because of what spending? Not defense. In terms of magnitudes. Because on defense, spending on defense ranges from below 1%, so by general to 4%. You are catching up in the United States. On education, a little more, 7-8%. But whenever spending is 40%, it's because of social transfer. And if you want to do something about excessive spending in order to reduce taxes, you cannot overlook the largest items, which is social spending, which is politically usually pretty popular. This is why it is so easy to expand, to increase social spending, and usually it's difficult to reduce it until you have a crisis. But once you have the crisis, don't waste it. Look for radical reform. It was like in Poland. We have a very deep crisis. So there are very little people who believe that we should go like that in the longer future. This facilitated what I did in 1989, a very radical, comprehensive reforms, both on fiscal side, on monetary side, and on institutional side. Okay. Now, this shows inflation, history of inflation. In Poland, once again, we started from high inflation. I was before I was first in charge of economic reforms as a deputy prime minister, Minister of Finance in 3 various governments. Then I was responsible for privatization, for fiscal reform. But then, in 2001 and 2007, I was elected the central banker. Inflation was not 10% a month, or 10% a year, still too high. My job was to bring inflation to work together. We succeeded. Inflation was reduced below 2%. Civilized. Okay. So this is a story of Poland's catching up with the West in terms of GDP per capita. Compared to the average of OECD countries, the richer countries in Germany, it shows we reduced very much the gap between Poland and Germany for us is very important as an former aggressor point of reference, but still we have to go 65% of the German per capita. Okay. We still now coming to the future. We have changed a lot, but we still have much to do in Poland. This is my view, which I shared with the Polish part of also with you. So what remains to be done in order for Poland to catch up, to compete, catching up with rich countries in the West? We have to complete privatization because we have excessively high of state-owned enterprise. Look at the US. This is a correct percentage, almost zero. Among cloud enterprise. We are just behind Egypt, Russia, South Arabia. Quite a lot to privatize. Here's one goal. Sorry. State-owned enterprises. We have to increase the extent of economic freedom, which you achieve both through privatization and deregulation, because it has been declining. But look, in the US, there's small consolation that the US is declining. But a very interesting fact that it's been declining in the US too. So we have deregulation. Now we have excessive spending as percentage of GDP, and as a result, we have pretty high taxes. And it is our level of taxation as a percentage of GDP is higher than on average in OECD, even though it was lower 10 years ago. And I think this is the end of my presentation. And now let me say that if you have democracy, like we have in Poland, you have the freedom of association, so that you can act actively, collectively, and not from individually. You can have social media, you should use them. Then, in such a conditions, what directions prevails in policies depends on the policy pressures. peaceful pushes, including a manifestation, but also social media. And if populists prevail, if the study said, and populists and politicians are encouraged to continue that policies. So ultimately, what happens in three countries, in the sense of freedom of association, elections, etc., it ultimately depends on the organized professional activity of civil society. This is why, since I finished my job in the political sector and the central bank, I spent my time, besides family, on social media, Twitter, which is now called X, Facebook, and I got still many invitations for the radio and TV in Poland, so always accept, because this is the backbone of ideas and presentations. And if you want to have effective policies, you have to do that. Impressions. Thank you very much.
We'll leave it at that. Okay,
No,
so
not too long, I will.
I think it's on. Hi, so we finished early.
Oh,
with
I was
the
expected
presentation,
to speak
but
for
now
an
we-
hour. I never can speak for
but
an
now
hour.
we can have some time for questions.
Yes, absolutely. This is
So, yeah, that's sort of split faculty, students. Let's start with faculty first, and then we'll move on to students.
Charlie has a question.
Get to close.
It's my understanding that the war in Ukraine has affected Poland immensely. What is it, like 1 million people have crossed the border, and Polish people are helping put them up and so on. But I can imagine it's a punch in the gut for the economy. And the second question I have is, I was reading the Financial Times, and I found out that children were thrilled that homework has been banned. I was wondering if you know about that, but that seemed like an interesting subject too. Thank you.
okay. Let me try now. We sympathize with Ukraine very enough, because Ukraine is a subject of cruel aggression by Putin. And if Putin wins, that which was really very bad in itself, would be also dangerous for the rest. It's absolutely crucial. What the US government will do, this is a problem of arming the Ukrainian army. What we can do, we have some volunteers who work to fight on the Ukrainian side, but as you rightly pointed out, we have more than 1 million Ukrainians who work in Poland, so they contribute to Polish economy. They are not a government. But we wish to return to their own country. Once, hopefully, Putin has been stopped. This is the first point. Well, regarding banning the homework, I have mixed feelings, because I would like first to see what are the results of analytical comparison. Who have done it before? And what were the results? Why not the why are not the works which at the first sight to me as a cheap popular? Please the children and by children to please their parents. Please. Okay.
Another question. You see these statistics mentioned 49.6% of the GDP still in the state ownership.
Among other enterprises. So I should add,
That's a
there's largely under enterprises. In GDP, it's still about 17% of the GDP produced by the state sector, vis-a-vis over zero in the United States.
that's a good news. Now, what percent of that ownership were at least in the manufacturing sector? How much of it is private ownership?
Private ownership prevails in the manufacturing sector. The state sector is concentrated in energy. electricity production. Similarly, I think there's no rational reason for the state ownership to be present there. What is important is, of course, is competition. And usually, state enterprises prevail or completely exist when they don't have monopolistic position. So before privatizing, what remains to be privatized, we should be monopolized. Those parts of the economy which are still lacking competition.
Good. Before we go back to faculty, any students' question? All right, too late, you missed your chance.
You asked your question yesterday.
I mean, I have more.
Sure. I'm joking.
So thank you for coming here to present
Okay.
this presentation. I just have a question in regards to the current economic situation in Poland. Previously, for many years, Poland had a government that emphasized nationalism. Now with the election of the new government, do you see that Poland's economic situation they would pursue?
Okay, we have, as you may rightly mention, for the 8 previous years under elections in October, we had a government who was not as distinct from the previous one, which was not continuing to form, or as I said, unfinished, but going back in 2 respects, on 3 respects. First, the media. We still have the public media, and the public media recaptured by the ruling parties. It's more difficult for the politicians to capture private media than public media. This is an argument for privatizing public media. Okay, but at least running information or pseudo information programs in the public media, because they can easily serve also the public interest. So first. Secondly, our relationship with the West worsened because European Union, especially the US, right there was not sympathetic to what was going on in Poland. And finally, on the economic front, as I mentioned, we are going back. There was a stop to privatization, and there were some nationalizations. Remember that there is a time lag between a start of good or bad policies and their results. So economic situation was pretty good during that government. Also because we have an influx of Ukrainians, as was mentioned, work in Poland, so it was probably compensating. But now the new government has inherited the results on previous bad policies. It very much depends on the kinds and direction of economic policies the new government would take. So far, I don't see much change. There's a radical change in the rule of law. It's very important. Very important. Under the previous government, prosecution, which are very dangerous professions, they were used to prosecute opponents of the ruling parties. Now this has been fixed or being fixed. Some judges were made the party, serving the party interest, and this is increased too. So on the justice system, I see a lot of change, positive change. In the media, there's a lot of change. But so far, not much of income. So on the fiscal side, we have an excessive deficit this year, 5% of the GDP, because of excessive spending. And it continues. And there's nothing on privatizing the Polish economy, the regulation. So we see. And also in the election campaign, there was an attempt on the opposition side to outbid the ruling party who would promise more for spending. So we see. I think the economic situation in Poland will be the main challenge. for Poland and for the new government.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, wait, actually, do you hear me all? Oh,
Yeah.
Line, leave the mic.
oh, sure, fair enough. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. No. All right. I've noticed when I was doing a little research about this, I see that, I thought maybe to ask, but I noticed that some of your opponents, and, one of them made like a specific paper in 1992 that described while shock therapy, while beneficial, failed in terms of growth, and they described the evolutionary approach as a much more successful option in comparison to your shock therapy. What would be your response to them?
You should distinguish between arguments which are based on facts and arguments which are based on emotional meaning of the words. Why is exact sciences, what is the most distinguishes so-called social sciences from exact sciences or sciences? In sciences, use natural experiments which are controlled, or mathematics, much more than social science. Social sciences, especially in the discussions about policies,
Excuse me,
words.
people online can't see you.
Oh,
Yeah, there you go.
Words matter. And this is unavoidable. I am not criticizing, but I only stated the fact that one should be aware of this. So each words are misleading. Those are emotionally loaded. For example, shock therapy. Who likes shocks? So, and this was for shock therapy. I never used this word because I knew this emotional word. So I'm using the word radical compared to gradual. The same goes for, you mentioned this juxtaposition of shock versus evolution. What does it mean? If you only limit yourself to assessing the problem based on these words, you would be misinformed or misled. Evolutionary means slow. Evolution. Shock means bad. So one should always look at the good data and comparing data. And in this case, there's a lot of comparisons. One can compare policy economic growth with that of other countries, considering differences in initial conditions. And let me add that initial conditions in Poland are not worse than in other countries. And then you come to the conclusion. I don't think, but never base your judgments, opinions on mere words. This is pretty common in discussion about social policies.
Another question.
So I cannot just respond. I will have to say evolutionary what it means. Slower, if one looks at countries which have delayed reforms or made them much slower, if you define evolution in these terms, you can't find an example of success. Or something which instances where countries which follow this approach would achieve better results than Poland with appropriate time.
Another question in this point.
Hi, my name is Matthew Siegel. I'm currently a senior majoring in finance. I'm studying for my bachelor's and master's of science in finance. Firstly, I want to say thank you so much for coming to speak with us. When you brought up Venezuela and Maduro, I found that incredibly relevant because a lot of my family actually came from there and currently live there, so they're living under that situation. So hopefully it gets better. My question is actually related to our current economy in America. Is there anything, having lived through both a pre and post-communist regime in Poland, is there any opinion you have on the direction of our current economy in America? And is there anything that we're doing wrong that you think we could learn from Poland's revitalization?
It's a warning. A lot of warnings, but you have a lot of good economists in the US that can only repeat opinions of some of them. For the last year, the US economy has been growing a bit faster than European Union, which is good. But this does not mean that there are no problems. Fiscal, we have much more higher spending than taxes. As a result, there's a large deficit. And it is pretty cheap for the United States to finance the deficit because it's large country. But if this continues, then even the United States would have to pay more and more for the deficits, which are due not to excessive defense spending, but to excessive social spending, as every country which suffers from the deficits. So one weakness I could see is this. You know, the Economist is the best, I think, weekly. They have every week a compilation of data for some 30 more countries. Okay, thank you. Okay. And US belongs to countries which have large deficits. On privatization, fortunately, you have nothing almost nothing to privatize. That's shown very little state ownership. But on fiscal, and fiscal is always the most politicized policy. Usually, also there's a huge pressure to increase spending. It has to organize a countervailing power to stop these pressures to increase spending.
Hello, thank you again so much for your presentation and for spending time with us today. I kind of wanted to follow up a little bit on the question that came from the student, as somebody who does not study Eastern Europe, but mostly the United States, and in particular, I study racial economic inequality. One thing that Professor Gevorkian talked about in his introduction, both of Henry George and then what you was this notion of inequality. And in your presentation, you talked a lot about sort of per capita data across countries. And so I was wondering, sort of a two-part question. One, can you speak a little bit about inequality and how that looks in the sort of comparisons that you drew, and particularly just curious about the country of Poland itself. But then secondly, for a country like the US, so, you know, we come to these decisions about reforms not in a vacuum or looking to start from scratch and then come up with the ideal economy. We kind of have to reform based off of our present situations, which are based on history. And we have a unique history in the United States of, you know, slavery and other kinds of social inequalities. And so when we think about privatization or social spending, they're not really in a vacuum, right? So if we think about sort of letting companies or whomever act economically sort of in a free way, people are free to act in ways that reflect homophily, for example. So people tend to trade with people who are like them, and whether or not they're actively discriminating, we see lots of evidence of this sort of homophilous behavior of people engaging in economic activity with people who are like them, and the consequences of people who have been traditionally marginalized is that they continue to be marginalized. And so the social spending isn't necessarily just, you know, in a vacuum. In some ways, it's reacting to how free market actors would, their natural preferences. And so if you're choosing between rates, increasing social spending to try and, you know, address, I think the ideal would be that everybody is able to sort of have the same, you know, free access to and equal opportunity to engage economically. But when that's not been the case, that's just been the trend for years. You're dealing with that history. I guess how do you square that circle? Do you just say reduce social spending, and if certain groups of people who have been traditionally and historically marginalized continue to be marginalized, oh well, you know, how would you address that issue? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very, very important questions. Now, on the inequality, you know, it's a huge literature. I think the basic point is to distinguish between equality of situation, including incomes, and equality of opportunity. Now, nobody, I think, in his or her senses will propose that equal incomes and equal even impossible, because those who would like to impose equal incomes would be above the level. So fortunately, and we know that there are limits to progressive taxation. As it was clear in Sweden, some 50 years ago, not anymore, because it tends to discourage hardworking, capable people to work and encourages immigration. Okay? So, but the true problem, and I understand we are addressing this problem, is equality of opportunities. What are the chances of equally gifted hardworking people to achieve, to realize their social, their individual goals? And here's a true problem, and the identification of the barriers. Because equality is very, very important. Now, I am not going to speak about the United States in the presence of US speakers and citizens, but I only want to say that approach. This is a very, very serious problem. But certainly of the necessary ways to reduce this problem is education, including scholarships for younger people, so that the families who cannot afford good education would not be prevented in having their children and getting them education. And second, if one can identify barriers to employment which are not justified on efficiency based on prejudices, then such a barrier should be tackled on. This is the first. Now, on the social spending, always found dimension. I mentioned the size. Let me repeat, whenever there is excessive or large spending to the ratio, it is always because of large size of social spending. But besides the size, there is targeting. What is spent on? And what one should avoid? One should avoid social spending, which is going to the richer people. And one should target. For example, in Poland, the government, which lost elections but governed for the last 8 years, they introduced a program whereby every child in the family, regardless of the income of the family, was getting, parents were getting money, which meant that poorer people without children were subsidizing richer people with children. We don't want such a social spending, but this is anti-social targeting.
Hi, I'm Raymond Niles. I'm a professor of economics here. Again, thanks for coming. Very interesting presentation. So my question is, I don't know if this is working, but my question is, when you were a younger economist during the in the communist era, who were your influences, like, in terms of thinkers like Ludwig Erhard, or I don't know, Milton Friedman or Friedrich Hayek, and how accessible was this literature to you and the other sort of utopians who were hoping for a freer society and never thought you would realize it?
Okay. Well, let me mention that even though Poland was dominated by the Soviet Union and has imposed the Soviet model in the sense of dominance and state ownership and dictatorship, we have a bit more freedom. The Poland's deviation, the social stand. So if somebody wanted to read Hayek or Friedman in the library, not popular libraries, university libraries, he or she could do that. And it was not widely publicized and not translated into Polish. It happened after 8 years. As far as I'm concerned, I did not start with Hayek or Mises or Smith. I started with empirical research, the comparisons of economic performance depending on the system. only then I came to, but this was not a theoretical difference, this was empirical. A comparisons that brought about the obvious conclusions. Socialism is always bad. Capitalism is different, depending on the state information.
We have two questions online, which I think you can take if I read them all together. So first is what if the GDP is mostly financialization with no benefit for majority of the population? So think about this, maybe it relates to a couple of the slides. But the second question is, would adoption of the euro promote economic growth and help or hinder Poland's economic and financial stability? So
The first GDP is far from ideal, but it's the best. It does matter. For example, people in North Korea, the fact that GDP level in their countries so much low does not matter, does not measure the difference between North Korea and South Korea. So I think perfect, not the best measure of sufficiently large differences in average level of income. Of course, it is not the only aspect. What was mentioned, inequalities, especially of inequalities of opportunities, matter very much. But no serious research which compares the countries can give up on GDP figures. This was the first. What was the second? Sorry.
Euro.
On euro. I think from the Polish perspective, euro is not priority. I'm not saying euro would be bad, but I think we have more important things to do in Poland in order to maintain catching up with us. And these important things I tried to mention: completing privatization, deregulation, fixing the fiscal side, and maintaining or bringing down inflation. I think that are most important, and they do not depend on the European Union, they depend on us, on policies. Euro, okay, I'm not against, but this is not an immediate goal, and you can have euro and have that economic situation. But having euro is not a guarantee of good economic performance. One warning among many would be Greece. They go with euro, they have a bad domestic economic policies, they're running the crisis, they lost quite a lot of distance vis-a-vis other countries. And also, one of the things is that having euro would mean accepting interest rates of European Central Bank, which may be too low for countries like Poland, which need to catch up.
This was obviously a plan that seemed to work from a capitalist perspective. Hindsight being 2020, looking back, what is the thing that stands out the most that you would have done differently? Now looking
Starting
back,
89.
yeah, starting in '89.
Well, there are many opponents. This program, but frankly speaking, besides rhetoric, and besides saying that this would be slower, we should go slowly, which I think was announced. I could not find a reasonable criticism, even although trying to be open. And my true response is, if possible, we try to be faster, not slower, especially on privatization, because this was slowed down by political obstacles, changes in the government. And the miracle is that we succeeded, finally, after, even though there were changes in the government. Let me go on that, because what we know, analysis of various systems is that the dominance of state ownership cannot be lastingly combined with democracy. So socialism is always a dictatorship. In other words, capitalism defined by the dominance of private ownership is a necessary, not sufficient, but necessary condition for elective government. There is no exception to this rule. But what's interesting against this, that it was impossible to privatize socialist economy or post-socialist economy within a year or two. It took more time by necessity, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. But we started with a quasi-socialist economy and we introduced democracy, elected governments. And even though economy was still dominated, democracy has been maintained. This is something to talk. And this goes not only for Poland. It's not only for Poland, it's also for other socialist countries, like Czech Republic, Slovakia. And whenever democracy was stopped because of politics, like could be in Russia.
Yeah. Any other questions? Always.
My question pertains to your comments on populism. You see, populism, I guess, exists on both the left and the right, and seeing populists as being willing to increase spending, but not decrease spending. My question is we see populism increasing in the US, both on the left and the right. And I think what's interesting is, particularly on the right, is you no longer see such an appetite for fiscal conservatism of cutting Social Security or whatever that might be. So I guess my question really is, where does populism ultimately come from? What is the cause of this populism? And is this not a function of something deeper within society, economic inequality, for example?
A very important question. Let me first say that by populism, I mean cheating. In the sense that one promises something which cannot be delivered, it's unachievable, or one promises something which is costly to the society without mentioning the cost. This is a cheating propaganda. So no cost, hiding the cost, or promising miracles. So there are charlatans. By definition, those who promote and promise something that is costly and present this as non-costly or unachievable, they are charlatans. This is just the definition. And if according to the definition, cheating in politics increases, it's a very good question. It requires a very careful research. I have not researched it myself. I read scientific and social media, and one explanation for a potential growth in populism would be social media. We are going to stay with social media. So in a sense, it is democratization. In its own good. But perhaps it gives more opportunities for spreading populism as a sense of false propaganda. But we cannot go back. If it is true, obviously we cannot go back. So what is the response? Be active on social media and unmask populism. This is what I am doing in Poland. Also, this is the only solution. Social media are going to stay with us, but like it or not, they are being used and continue to be used by the populists. We have to have the better on the populists.
We have a couple of more questions online. So one is related, actually asking about students. So what advice would you give to students starting out in the labor market in the next few years, especially for those that would like to go into international business? Is there
I'm not in a business of giving advice, professional advice to students. So it's my teaching to make them more resistant to various fallacies.
Okay. Second question, more on macroeconomics. I will just summarize. Is there one economic indicator, one economic variable that can tell us something that measures the true economic outlook of a country? Other than GDP and tax.
So I think there's no good substitute in my mind to GDP per capita growth. It's imperfect kind of thinking. Nothing comes to my mind at the moment.
I will just for a moment take over the time and ask a question going back to the Novak's question, connecting with that. Maybe you could just, going back into economic history a little bit, tell us how Poland was different from other socialist countries, because that may have played a role in the success of the reforms, and so the need maybe even going even faster with that.
No, I am pretty suspicious about theories of national character.
No, I mean,
And then to try to credit national character for success of failure.
in terms
It's
of,
very popular, but not empirical enough.
in macroeconomic terms, so the private agriculture,
Public agriculture was a mixed blessing. And now it is a mixed blessing. I am not criticizing God for the big private farmers in Poland. But I am looking at it from a systemic perspective. Why? Because once socialism collapsed, in agriculture, it left large farms, who then were privatized, like in Ukraine. In Poland, fortunately perhaps, for Poland under socialism, collectivization was stopped, attempted by stopped. But the structural legacy in agriculture was that we have small farms. And which are not efficient enough. They need some voluntary consolidation.
thank you. We have 3 or so minutes for some last pressing questions, and I know there's one over here and the other over there.
What I'll say is, I didn't mean disrespect when I did the first question. I was just quoting the paper. And,
It's okay. I
It's okay.
have not suspected.
okay. Well, the other question I was going to come to is you mentioned GDP is the best indicator. But one thing I have noticed both in the US and Poland, that what percentage of GDP growth would you say is a result of government or excessive government spending? What I noticed is that Poland had recently passed government bills during the pandemic, and also as a result, I think also recently they also approved some spending for Ukraine as well, right? Do you believe that long-term that GDP would be a difficult measure if government keeps spending? And what other measures would you recommend in the US? Other measures of the economic outlook is, I believe, like consumer price index, producer price index. Do you think Poland would have to go through another path? I mean, to measure economic outlook?
As economic growth should be analyzed in the longer time perspective, not 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but then you have obvious cycles. At 5, 10, 15, 20 years, longer term growth. And then you should focus on the supply side, not the demand side. You cannot achieve, if the supply side is bad, I am coming to that in a while, you cannot compensate for the bad supply side for spending more. If it were possible, every country would have been rich, by increasing fiscal spending. It's impossible. So the most important problem is the shape of the supply side. And then there are various levels of explanation. The first level, you look at investment, consumption, total factor productivity, in other words, efficiency. Yes? But this is superficial. You have to dig deeper. What does it mean digging deeper? Explaining differences in innovativeness, which are responsible for differences in factor productivity. And the main difference between Microsoft is failure, because of course inefficiency. But you can't have innovativeness, efficiency without competition and private ownership. There was a big myth Marxism, Leninism, etc. By nationalizing the economy, we achieve economic growth, and this was good. So one has to look at the supply side, but not only these superficial factors, as I mentioned, investment rate, employment dynamics, because they may be misleading. One of the most famous economists in the world, Nobel laureate, Paul Samuelson, he was predicting in the 80s when Soviet Union would reach the level of the United States. Why? Because he was disregarding the most important deeper institutional factors. Amazing. So one has to look at the supply side and one has to look at the institutional shape factors in the supply side. And this means private ownership, competition, and rule of law. If this is lacking, if you have state ownership, no way you can catch up. If you have private ownership but monopolies, no way. If you have private ownership but chaos, no rule of law, you cannot catch up. So you have a tribe, private ownership, competition, rule of law. Then you can catch up.
We have 1 minute for one more question, last question. But just for the audience, the duo over here have been leading the conversation for the past 2 days. Josh.
Thank you. My name is Josh McCall. So,
We're not already.
yes. So I wanted to ask you, so you spent some time previously discussing the difference between basically your side of the political aisle, the more economically laissez-faire side, and your opponents who are more fiscally statist. However, there are many instances where the more economically liberal side of the Polish political party, the ones who were in opposition until recently, supported more statist economic measures, such as severely limiting the usage of fossil fuels that companies can use, and raising taxes on the excise taxes of oil, and raising value-added tax. And conversely, some of the fiscally statist opponents have occasionally done economically liberal policies. For example, in 2019, the Law and Justice Party passed a law where they exempted everyone 26 and under from paying income taxes in Poland. So I wanted to ask, do you believe that there's a really a significant economic difference between the two Polish parties, or are they both populists, just populist in slightly different ways? Because there seems to be some sort of overlap of statism and liberalism between the two, nevertheless, despite their stated positions and so on.
So the conventional labels, left and right, do not make sense. Output information about the orientation and policies. I am not only saying about Poland, but usually one should not focus on the names and the name of the parties. This is my much to do what they're promising to do, especially while extending the scope of economic freedom and stabilizing the economy. I think there are two places. And names do not matter. They're usually missing. They like to be like.
Okay, I think we have to conclude now, so thank you very much. Your faculty, colleagues, our students.